The question came without warning. No preamble, no careful architecture, no softening of the moment before the moment arrived. It simply dropped. 4 words, suspended above a white tablecloth, 2 half-finished dinner plates, and the fragile architecture of a life that had never expected to arrive at this particular crossroads. Will you marry me? The woman who had built an empire from nothing, who had sat across from hostile boards and ruthless competitors and never once let her voice crack, was standing at the head of a private dining table, her hands trembling ever so slightly at her sides. The man she was asking sat completely still, a warehouse manager, a single father, a man whose hands bore the calluses of honest work and whose eyes carried the particular quietness of someone who had long ago decided that wanting too much was a luxury he could not afford. And beside him, his 18-year-old daughter, fork suspended halfway to her lips, dark eyes moving slowly between the woman who had spoken and the father who had not yet found the words to answer. Nobody in that room could have predicted what the daughter said next. But to understand why her words shattered every single person in that room, you have to go back to the beginning. Marcus Webb was 43 years old, and he had built his life the way a careful man builds a stone wall, one solid piece at a time, no shortcuts, no ornament, nothing that wouldn't hold weight. He woke every morning at 5:15, made coffee in the same dented percolator he'd come migration, owned for 9 years, dark blue enamel, with a crack along the handle that he'd throw was wrapped in electrical tape, and never gotten around to replacing. He was at the distribution warehouse by 6, managing a floor team of 16 people, with the kind of steady, unhurried authority that came not from rank, but from character. His team didn't fear him. They trusted him. There is a difference, and it is not a small one. He drove a 12-year-old pickup truck, the color of old iron. There was a parking permit sticker on the windshield from his daughters, white as middle school, that he had never peeled off because, in some quiet way he could not fully explain, he didn't want to. His daughter was Lily, 17, going on 30, with her mother's bone structure and her father's absolute refusal to say anything she didn't mean. She played violin badly and chess beautifully, kept a journal she never let anyone read, and had been accepted to an environmental science program at a university 3 states away, a fact that filled Marcus simultaneously with a fierce, private pride and a specific kind of quiet dread he had not yet named aloud. Her mother, Denise, had died 6 years ago, not suddenly, which in some ways made it harder. A diagnosis, then 18 months, then a morning in November, when the house went irreversibly quiet. Marcus had not dated since, not from lack of opportunity, from something more complicated. A sense that the ecosystem he and Lily had built together was precisely calibrated, and that, introducing a new element, required a certainty he had never been able to manufacture on the new demand. So he remained alone, and if the evenings felt very long sometimes, after Lily went to her room, he did not dwell on it. He read, he went to bed, he started again. He was, in every meaningful sense, a man who had learned to be enough for himself, by being everything for someone else. 6 months before the evening that would change everything, Lily had looked at him across the dinner table with the directness he loved most about her, and said, "Dad, you're allowed to want things for yourself, too." He had smiled in the way that meant he wasn't going to engage with the substance of what she'd yell, reached across and stole one of her fries, and changed the subject entirely. Lily had let him, but she had not forgotten. The day Marcus met Celeste Okafor, he was running 15 minutes late, for nothing in particular. It was a Thursday, in early November. He had taken a detour through the older part of the city, because a water main had burst on his usual route. Wide streets with century-old oak trees and townhouses set back behind iron fences, the sidewalks banked with fallen leaves in deep amber and rust. He saw the car from half a block away, a dark, sleek vehicle, the kind that exists in a different category of object from his own truck, pulled to the shoulder, with its hazard lights pulsing orange in the gray afternoon. A woman stood beside it, in a long charcoal coat, phone to her ear, her posture conveying the very specific frustration of someone who is accustomed to problems resolving themselves, and is currently watching that expectation collapse in real time. Marcus pulled over without debate. His father had done the same on a highway outside Detroit when Marcus was 8. and the lesson had calcified into reflex over the decades. He was not a man who noticed things like the precise cut of a coat or the quality of someone's shoes. He noticed that the woman was cold, that her tire was flat, and that her phone signal was clearly unreliable by the way she kept angling it toward the sky. He introduced himself, confirmed she hadn't reached roadside assistance, and opened the trunk to find the spare. It took him about 22 minutes, working in the gathering dark, while the woman stood a few feet away and made 2 more phone calls she eventually abandoned. She watched him work with an expression that shifted, almost imperceptibly, from impatience to something quieter. When he finished, he closed the trunk and told her she should have the tire properly inspected before the weekend. She reached into her bag. He stopped her with a small, unhurried shake of his head. "It wasn't a problem," he said. "Drive safe." And he got back in his truck and drove away. Celeste Okafor stood on that sidewalk for a long moment after his taillights disappeared around the bend, and she felt something she could not immediately name. It took her until she was back in traffic, moving again through the gray evening city, to identify it. She felt seen, not recognized, not appraised, simply seen in the most ordinary, undemanding way imaginable, by someone who had wanted absolutely nothing in return. She was not used to that. Celeste had built her company from a single logistics contract at 26, leveraging borrowed capital and a ferocity of focus that had made people underestimate her exactly once. 17 years later, her name appeared in financial publications under words like visionary and formidable and, occasionally, ruthless, which she had learned to accept as the language people used when they wanted to admire a woman, without quite admitting they were doing so. The people in her orbit wanted things from her. Her board wanted results. Her advisors wanted access. The men who had pursued her over the years had wanted, at various depths, the proximity to her success that a relationship would provide. She had grown expert at identifying the wanting in people before they recognized it in themselves. Marcus Webb had looked at her and wanted nothing. She found him through a logistics contact within 48 hours, and she felt only briefly self-conscious about the reach that required. She called him herself. His voice on the phone was exactly as it had been on that street, unhurried, slightly surprised. She thanked him properly, and when she asked if he would allow her to take him to dinner, just dinner, purely to express genuine gratitude, he paused long enough that she thought he would decline. Then he said, in the voice of a man deciding that suspicion would be uncharitable, "I suppose that would be fine," and something that had not yet begun, began. The dinner lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes. Celeste had planned for one. She had expected to make efficient, polished conversation, the kind she performed at every event she attended. Instead, she found herself actually talking about growing up in a 2-bedroom apartment in a city that had not been kind to her family, about her mother working doubles and still coming up short, about the particular hunger of watching the world through glass and deciding, at 13, that you were going to get to the other side of it, no matter what it cost. Marcus listened, in a way she had almost forgotten people could listen, without waiting for his turn, without angling the conversation back toward himself, without the subtle forward tilt of someone who is already composing their response while you'd still forming your thought. He simply attended to what she was saying. Partway through the meal, she heard herself say something specific and unguarded about her mother, something she had not said aloud to anyone in nearly a decade, and the realization did not make her want to take it back, which was, itself, unusual enough to pay attention to. He asked thoughtful, specific questions. He did not appear to be cataloging her life for later use. He was just listening. Can you imagine how it feels to be truly heard by someone who has nothing to gain from hearing you? The months that followed had the quality of weather-changing seasons, gradual enough that on any single day you might not notice the shift, but unmistakable in aggregate. They began meeting with increasing frequency, always fitting around Marcus's schedule, because his was the less flexible of the two, and that was simply the reality. Celeste, who had never organized her personal life around anyone else's constraints, found the adjustment easier than expected, which told her something. She met Lily once, briefly, at a coffee shop. Marcus introduced them simply as people who knew each other. Lily had been polite, attentive, and very clearly paying close attention to something she wasn't yet ready to address directly. And then, the world noticed. A photographer caught them walking outside a bookshop one rainy evening, close together in conversation. The image circulated. The commentary followed with the speed and appetite such things always produce. The contrast made for an easy story. The logistics billionaire and the warehouse manager. The obvious imbalance. The obvious question about motivation. The word opportunist appeared in one piece. The phrase gold digger appeared in 3. Marcus read none of it himself. But a colleague printed one piece and left it on his locker without explanation, and that told him enough. He began to withdraw, not dramatically, not with a confrontation or a speech, in the quiet, incremental way of someone who has decided that the most protective thing they can do for another person is to remove themselves before more damage is done. He returned her calls a little more slowly. He found reasons the timing didn't work. He was genuinely busy, genuinely constrained by the actual architecture of his actual life, and he used both of those things as cover for something deeper. The belief, worn smooth by years of practice, that he was doing her a favor. Celeste noticed. She noticed with the precision of someone who had spent 20 years reading rooms and people, and the barely visible tells of those who believed they were concealing themselves. Effectively, the micro-shifts, the emails a day late, the warmth that was technically still present, but had been turned several degrees cooler by something she hadn't been given the opportunity to address. For 2 weeks, she let it happen. Not from passivity, from strategy. She needed those 2 weeks to arrive at a certainty she could not afford to manufacture. Then she drove to his house on a Sunday afternoon, without calling ahead. Marcus opened the door in the clothes of a man who had been working in the yard. Old flannel shirt, jeans with soil at the knees, an expression that cycled through surprise and something very close to relief, before settling into careful neutrality. She had not prepared a speech. Speeches gave the other person time to construct defenses while you were still speaking. She wanted a conversation. She told him, with the directness that was the most fundamental thing about her, that she knew exactly what he was doing, and she was asking him to stop. "I don't need you to have money," she said, and there was no defensive edge to it, no strain, no effort to convince. She said it the way you state a coordinate, flat and clear. "I don't need you to be something you're not, or to belong to a world that has no right to require your presence." She said that she had spent the better part of 2 decades building things and accumulating things and achieving things. And the specific ache of her life in recent years had not been about any deficiency in what she had built. It had been about the absence of someone with whom she could simply be. Someone who was not measuring her against her own net worth. Someone who listened, not because she was useful to listen to, but because he was genuinely curious about what she thought. "You are the first person I have met in a very long time," she said, "who makes me feel like the money is beside the point. And that is not a small thing. That is an enormous thing." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the window, the November yard was brown and still. Marcus sat across from her and didn't speak for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm afraid I'm going to hurt you." And she said, "You've already decided to protect me from something I didn't ask to be protected from. That isn't the same as not hurting me." He had no answer for that. After a while she stood, said she had to go. He walked her to the door. At the threshold, she turned and looked at him, and whatever she saw in his face was enough. "Think about it," she said. He nodded, and she left. Marcus stood in his open doorway until the cold came through his flannel shirt and pressed against his chest. Then he went back inside, sat at the kitchen table, and did not move for a long time. That night, Lily came home to find her father quieter than usual. Not troubled, just occupied, in the way of a man who is working through something interior and hasn't finished yet. She made dinner, pasta, because it was a Sunday, and pasta was what Sunday required in their house. They ate side by side at the small kitchen table, with the window showing the dark yard. She didn't push. She had inherited from him the understanding that some things arrive at their own pace. But after they cleared the plates, she came and stood beside him at the sink, close enough that their shoulders touched, and said nothing at all. Just stood there, solid and present. The way he had stood beside her for 6 years whenever silence was the more honest language. He put his arm around her, and she leaned briefly against his shoulder. And he thought, she is going to be all right. Whatever happens, she is going to be all right. And that certainty released something in him that had been locked for a very long time. The question had been, will you marry me? And here they all were, back in that restaurant, in that private dining room with the soft candlelight and the white tablecloth, exactly as they had been at the opening of this story. Celeste had planned the dinner with the same precision she brought to negotiations that mattered. She had debated for days whether to invite Lily. She had finally decided that to exclude her would be a kind of dishonesty, that what she intended to do affected Lily as much as it affected Marcus, and that treating her as secondary at this particular moment would be exactly the wrong signal. So there were 3 chairs, 3 place settings, 3 glasses of water already poured. Lily had worn a simple dark dress. Marcus had worn the sports coat he'd bought for Lily's middle school graduation, worn perhaps 3 times since. Celeste had been already seated when they arrived, and she stood when she saw them, and there was a brief, slightly awkward exchange of greetings that resolved into the ordinary business of sitting down and looking at menus. The dinner was good. They talked, genuinely, with the ease of people who have separately decided to show up, honestly, to whatever the evening required. Lily had her father's directness and a warmth that was entirely her own. She asked Celeste questions that were neither deferential nor aggressive, but simply genuine. Celeste answered them the same way. Marcus watched the 2 of them across the table, with an expression a person observing from outside might have struggled to name, something between wonder and the specific relief of a man who has been bracing for impact and found instead that the ground beneath him was solid. When they had moved through the main course and into the unhurried conversation that follows, good food, Celeste set down her glass. She had not planned this for a precise moment. She had planned the general shape and trusted the specific moment to announce itself. It announced itself. She rose slowly from her chair, because this deserved a gravity, and she intended to give it one. The table fell quiet. She looked at Marcus, with the complete, unguarded attention of someone who has decided that the outcome of this moment is worth every risk the moment carries. Marcus Webb, she said, and her voice did not waver, because she had decided before she rose from that chair that whatever happened next, she would not let it waver. Will you marry me? She had not said I love you first, had not said I need you, or any of the softer constructions that might have made the question smaller and safer. She had said simply the thing she meant, because that was the only way she knew how to mean it. The silence that followed was total. Marcus's face underwent a series of small transformations, surprise, then something that moved through the territory of joy, before doubt pulled it back. His mouth opened. Nothing came out, because some questions are large enough that the throat closes around any immediate response. Celeste was aware of Lily in her peripheral vision. She had been steeling herself for this, the possibility that the daughter who had lived at the center of her father's world would see this proposal as a threat to that center and respond accordingly. It was a reasonable thing to have worried about. It was not what happened. Lily pushed back her chair and stood, not quickly, deliberately, with the considered movement of someone who knows that what they are about to say matters, and wants to say it correctly. Celeste felt her stomach tighten. She met Lily's eyes, and found in them something she had not expected, not hostility, not warning, a look of clear, uncomplicated feeling. Lily turned first to her father, who was sitting very still, then back to Celeste, and she spoke in the measured, unhurried voice of a young woman who has thought about this more carefully, and for longer, than anyone in the room has understood. If there is anyone in this world who deserves to be loved again, Lily said, it's him. Celeste heard the words, and felt them land somewhere deep and unexpected. Her throat tightened. She had prepared, in the vague way of someone who knows a moment will be emotional, for some version of emotion. Not for this. Not for the specific precision of this. From this particular person. Lily was not finished. I've been watching my dad for 6 years, she said, more quietly now, as though the volume of the room had shifted without anyone touching anything. He woke up early every single day. He went to work. He came home. He made dinner. He sat with me while I did homework. He never once let me feel the weight of what he was carrying. She paused. But I watched. I always watched. And I could see it. The way something in him got quieter every year. The way something in him went still. Her voice was steady. The night you asked him to marry you, it was the first time in years I last seen him look like something had turned back on. Celeste felt the tears before she understood they were there. She was not generally a woman who cried in front of other people. She had learned early that vulnerability in public carried a cost, and she had invested years in building the interior architecture that kept her composed in moments that demanded it. But the architecture was not built for this. For the sight of a 17-year-old girl standing in a restaurant dining room and saying, with perfect undefended honesty, that she had been carrying a private vigil for her father's happiness for 6 years, quietly, without being asked, because she loved him, because she understood his sacrifice, even when he had never named it as sacrifice. Marcus made a sound, not a word, just a sound, low and barely controlled. The sound of a man reaching the edge of the composure he has been maintaining by sheer will, and finding that will has limits. He pressed his hand briefly over his mouth and looked at his daughter. Lily looked back at him, and between them passed something that required no translation. She sat back down, but not before she turned once more to Celeste and said, with quiet certainty, "I wasn't going to stand in the way of that." The three of them were quiet for a moment, not an empty silence, a full one, packed with the weight of things spoken and unspoken, with gratitude and grief, and the particular sweetness of a moment that will be carried forward into every moment that follows it. Marcus reached across the table, not toward Celeste yet, toward Lily. He covered her hand with his, the way he had been covering her hand since she was 11 years old, and the world had delivered its first unbearable piece of news. Lily turned her hand over and held his. Neither of them looked away for a long, full moment. Then Marcus looked at Celeste. His eyes were wet. His expression was the most open she had ever seen it. All the carefulness gone, the protective scaffolding set aside, nothing between her and what he actually felt. He exhaled slowly. He lifted his free hand from the table and extended it toward her, across the white cloth, palm up, and waited. Celeste reached across and put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, steady, the hands of someone who had been working hard his whole life, and she felt the solidity of it, the realness. This time she did not stop the tears from coming, because there was no longer any reason to stop them, and she was tired of having reasons. "Yes," Marcus said, and his voice was quieter than he intended, and steadier than he had any right to expect. "The answer is yes." He had not rehearsed those words, had not dressed them up or found a better arrangement for them. They were simply the truest thing in the room, and being true, they were enough. That evening, after the restaurant had grown quiet around them, and the candle on the table had burned to half its height, the three of them sat together with the remnants of dinner between them, and talked until the staff began to turn off lights in distant corners of the room. It was Lily who finally said that maybe they should go, in the voice she used when she was about to fall asleep sitting up. Outside, the November air was cold and clean, and smelled of fallen leaves and the particular darkness of a city that is finally, for once, offering something good. Marcus walked between them, his hands in his coat pockets, his shoulders carrying the unmistakable posture of a man who has just set down something very heavy and is still adjusting to the lightness. And what had begun on the shoulder of a tree-lined street on a gray Thursday afternoon, a flat tire, a stranger with a jack, 4 words exchanged and 1 refused, had arrived, without fanfare, without spectacle, at exactly this. 3 people walking together into the dark, and none of them wanted to be the first to say good night.